Strike 1. Russian landing ships and much more were taken out in a massive overnight operation that has left Russian sailors racked with PTSD. Strike 2. The only oil refinery and export hub that Russia has in the Black Sea region burns, as Ukraine strikes again and again against Russia's Crimean infrastructure. As for Strike 3, that may well be the complete end to Russian rule in Crimea. Russian sailors and potential sailors are fleeing the peninsula like rats on a sinking ship as the deoccupation of the Black Sea begins. On April 20th, the news broke that one of Ukraine's most secretive units had taken aim at a bunch of targets in occupied Crimea. The clandestine Ghosts unit, which is part of Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, or HUR, had turned the Sevastopol Bay into a hellscape for the Black Sea fleet the night before, as a series of drone strikes rendered 2 more ships from Putin's fleet inoperable. The targets weren't Russian missile carriers or similar warships this time around. Ukraine had already taken out plenty of those types of ships, and what Russia has left is being kept as far away from Crimea as possible, the Kremlin sphere of Ukraine's drones and missiles. Instead, the Ghosts took aim at a pair of Russian landing ships that Putin has been using to ship cargo and soldiers from Crimea to the Ukrainian mainland. The Project 775 Yamal was one of the targets. Built back in 1988, making it yet another piece of Soviet-era equipment that Putin has decided is good enough for the Ukraine war, the ship is capable of carrying 500 tons of cargo. That cargo can include troops and vehicles, by the way. As for the second ship, that was the Project 1171 Nikolai Filchenkov, which is even older than the first vessel. Built in 1975, the landing ship has a capacity of 1,000 tons and can be used for amphibious operations and assaults. You know, if Russia were able to launch anything like that from the Black Sea. Both ships were idling in the harbor at the time the Ghosts launched their attack. Now, HUR reports they have been rendered completely inoperable by Ukrainian drones. Not satisfied with taking out ships that Russia has been using to supply its troops on the mainland, the Ghosts went deeper into Crimea. In addition to taking out the Russian landing craft, the Ghosts also scored a direct hit against a Russian Podlet K1 radar system. With a range of between 10 and 300 kilometers or 6.2 and 186 miles, the Podlet can track up to 200 targets simultaneously and is able to keep up with incoming projectiles traveling at speeds of 4,400 kilometers or a little over 2,200 miles per hour. Russia needs systems like these. They offer early warning of incoming drones and missiles, which, in theory, should allow Russia to organize its air defenses to take out the incoming threat long before it touches down. That didn't happen on the night of April 19th. The Podlet K1 was destroyed by the very type of threat that it was supposed to detect. And that failure, either of the Podlet K1 or the air defense systems that are supposed to trigger when the Russian radar detects a threat, has just cost Putin $5 million. Can probably add tens of millions of dollars to that figure for the pair of landing ships that the Ghosts rendered inoperable. Oh, and just in case you're skeptical about the success of Ukraine's most recent Crimean assault, HUR is one step ahead. It didn't just say what it did, it has the footage to prove it. Published on Telegram alongside the statement that revealed what the Ghosts who go bump in the Crimean night had pulled off. That footage shows us the perspective captured by several of Ukraine's drones as they made their approaches. Within the first 25 seconds of the video, we see a Ukrainian drone bear down on one of Russia's landing ships before it scores a direct hit. The view being captured by the drone fades in an instant as it unleashes its explosive payload. Then a second drone, a second ship, with the exact same result. There is no sign of Russia's air defenses rattling off rounds or firing missiles in any of this footage. It's almost like the Ghosts had a clear shot at Russia's vessels, which is yet another indicator that Putin simply doesn't have the equipment he needs to defend Crimea properly. As it turns out, that clear shot is the result of a lot of hard work done by Ukraine, and that's a problem for Russia. Ukraine's most recent attack in occupied Crimea has highlighted a campaign of degradation that has shattered the defenses that Russia built up on the peninsula. As the key post points out, Crimea has served as a major logistics and naval hub for Russia's Black Sea fleet, both during Ukraine invasion and in the 8 years that followed Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. Most of the international community continues to recognize Crimea as belonging to Ukraine, despite the Russian occupation and the referendum on the peninsula's future that was almost certainly illegitimate. Ukraine is now working on deoccupying Crimea for good. Stick with us because we'll have a lot more to say about Ukraine's Crimean campaign later in the video. Before we get to that, Ukraine wasn't done with Russia's Black Sea posture on April 19th. As ships burned and radar systems revealed how useless they really are, the situation escalated outside of Crimea. Another oil hub has been struck, and it's one that Ukraine has targeted before. In an April 20th report, the Kyiv Post revealed that Ukraine has been expanding its campaign against Russian oil, which is what led it to send its drones in the direction of the Tuapse oil refinery and export hub. Important due to being the only Black Sea export hub that Russia has, Tuapse isn't in Crimea. It's in the Russian region of Krasnodar Krai, which lies to the east of Crimea and also happens to be home to the Novorossiysk port, where Russia now stations most of the Black Sea fleet after it fled from Sevastopol. This second strike was confirmed by Ukraine's general staff, which also took to Telegram to share a few pictures of the raging fires and the thick smog that now blankets one of Russia's most important refineries and export hubs. The Tuapse oil refinery in the Krasnodar territory was hit again. A strike on the tank farm was recorded, followed by a fire on the facility's territory, Ukraine's general staff confirmed. It's added an extra little morsel that has gone underreported, which is that Ukraine's drones also struck an oil depot in the occupied Crimea. The Fardiska oil depot now burns as brightly as the refinery that likely provided the oil that was stored there, and both strikes have combined to make it far more difficult to get fuel to the troops that it has stationed in mainland Ukraine. More details come from United 24 Media. It says the residents on the ground have already been sending photos, videos, and reports to independent outlets such as Astra. Story is the same in all of these reports: massive fires, thick blankets of smoke. Several fuel storage tanks in Tuapse are burning in the aftermath of a mass drone strike that Russia was in no way prepared to counter. The fires in Tuapse are spreading too. Up to 10 of the facility's storage reservoirs have been affected by a blaze that encompasses a refinery that has an annual processing capacity of 12 million tons of oil. This is a site that produces diesel that meets the Euro 5 standards, which is why Tuapse has become Russia's key Black Sea oil export hub. It also makes fuel oils, aviation fuel, gasoline, and a host of oil products that Russia's military on the mainland needs for its assaults against Ukraine's positions. In short, Tuapse is vital for Russia. Ukraine knows that all too well, which is why it has struck this facility 9 times since Putin launched his full-scale invasion in 2022. And one of those strikes happened to come just days before the latest attack against the refinery. April 19th wasn't isolated, it was part of a classic Ukrainian double tap. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we cover here on the Military Show. We give you the full picture, not just the headlines. If you're getting the kind of insight that you need from us, remember to subscribe to the channel. Now, Russia is going to be furious about the April 19th Tuapse strike. Just 3 days before, it was dealing with a different Ukrainian attack against the very same facility. Fuel tanks went up in flames and multiple explosions were recorded during this attack, which was of a large enough scale to force authorities at Krasnodar Airport to implement temporary flight restrictions. Key post reveals that this initial strike caused a blaze so massive that it required over 150 firefighters and other emergency personnel to extinguish. The looks on the faces of those firefighters would have been priceless on April 19th. Just as they thought they'd gotten the fire that Ukraine caused under control, the buzzing of drones overhead revealed that they would have to do it all over again. Tuapse is a target, and it looks like Ukraine is going to hit over and over until Putin gets the message that using his Black Sea oil export hub is a no-go. What we see with the Tuapse strike is that Ukraine is going deeper than ever in its dual strategy of booting Russia out of the Black Sea and placing more pressure on Russia's oil sector. Ukraine's drones would have needed to travel over or around Crimea to reach Tuapse. That's unavoidable. What should be happening is that Russia's radar systems detect those drones, followed by air defenses shooting them out of the sky. But that isn't happening. Ukraine's drones are both hitting Crimea and flying right past it, which is a sign that some major gaps are developing in Putin's peninsular defenses. As for the oil, Ukraine has been hedging Russian oil for months now. However, it has ramped up its strikes since the end of March, likely due to the US temporarily lifting sanctions on Russian oil exports in the wake of the mess that is going on in the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine has responded to that pause in sanctions with weeks of attacks that have left Russian oil export hubs and refineries burning. The goal is twofold. First, as the head of Ukraine's presidential office, Kirill Budanov, points out, Ukraine wants to use these strikes to show that it still has plenty of cards to play as peace negotiations are ongoing. Russia wants to craft the narrative that Ukraine is a spent force. That's hard to do when your ships are sinking, your radars are being destroyed, and your oil infrastructure is burning due to Ukrainian drone strikes. Second, Ukraine wants to make sure that Russia can't profit anywhere near as much as Putin wants to profit in the wake of the oil price shocks that have resulted from Operation Epic Fury in Iran. Russia should be raking in the oil cash right now. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has led to Russian Urals crude oil trading at prices that are getting dangerously close to $100 per barrel just a few weeks ago. Strikes like those we saw in Tuapse have been successful for Ukraine. According to the new Voice of Ukraine, Russia's burning oil terminals and refineries are costing it $100 million per day in oil money. That's all revenue that Putin expected to be able to tax so he could generate more cash for his war machine. Instead, Russia now faces a monthly oil revenue black hole of $3 billion that will last for as long as Ukraine decides to maintain the level of strikes against Russia's oil that we've seen over the last few weeks. But let's come back to Crimea and the Black Sea. Earlier we told you that everything that happened on April 19th was all part of a larger Ukrainian campaign to force through the deoccupation of the Crimean Peninsula. Ukraine has realized it can't counter-invade that peninsula by land. It will be sending troops into choke points that make them easy to bombard with artillery and airstrikes. So Ukraine had been playing the long game. By whittling away at Russia's Crimean and Black Sea defenses, Ukraine is making the Crimean Peninsula too hot to handle for many of the Russian people who have found their way to the occupied territory. We've seen an interesting turnaround in how Russian people and soldiers have treated Crimea since Putin invaded Ukraine. During the early years of the war, Crimea was seen as something of a safe haven, at least when compared to the Ukrainian mainland where the bulk of the battle was raging. The peninsula was out of range of Ukrainian missiles and drones. Those weapons were making their mark in the Black Sea at that point in the war. Eventually, we'd start to see what they could do in Crimea itself. Still, even as recently as January 2024, Business Insider was reporting on entire platoons of Russian soldiers that were abandoning the front lines and trying to flee to Crimea. The average Russian perception of Crimea was that it was safe. Now, not so much. Just over a year later, Crimea has morphed from the place to flee to into the place from which Russians run. An April 2025 report published by RBC Ukraine revealed the Ukrainian partisan group Artesh had discovered the Russian officers and their families were running away from the annexed peninsula en masse. Panic reigned for senior officers of the Black Sea Fleet, who were trying to get away as fast as they could. Of course, the average soldier based in Crimea was thrown under the bus. All leave for the Russian army outside of the senior officers had been cancelled, and there were cover patrols on the streets keeping an eye out for everything from deserters to potential saboteurs. The safe haven had become a danger zone. This turnaround is a direct result of Ukraine's campaign against the occupying forces in Crimea. If a ground invasion isn't possible, Ukraine is going to grind the defenses that Putin has installed in Crimea into the ground. And in the process, it's going to show those living on the peninsula, be they Russian soldiers or civilians, that they should get out as fast as they can. The sailors who've just gotten PTSD after watching two of their landing ships get obliterated are just the start. Oh, and Russia is making things a whole lot worse. A mass exodus from Crimea may be on the cards, as Russia may soon add to the woes that Ukraine causes by forcing mobilization on those living in Crimea. That's according to Dmytro Petenchuk, who is the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Navy. Speaking to TSN English on March 23rd, he commented on how Russia's southern defense forces are going to start involving mobilized Crimeans in direct combat operations against Ukraine, starting on April 1st. This is nothing new, Petenchuk claims, noting that there are already several hundred Crimean casualties in Russia's war against Ukraine. As for the direct force mobilization, well, it's entirely expected. If it's already happening in the occupied parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson, then why can't it happen in Crimea as well? Petenchuk adds. Let's get this straight. Ukraine has already turned Crimea from a safe haven into a danger zone for Russia. Now, Putin is doubling down by forcing mobilization on people who had emigrated from Russia to help the Kremlin solidify its illegal hold over the Crimean Peninsula. What does Putin think is going to be the result of this? It won't be long before it isn't just officers trying to get as far away from Crimea as possible. Citizens and reservists are going to want to get out of Dodge. And those who don't will end up in Ukraine, where they will inevitably be destroyed after arriving on the front lines. The point we're making here is simple. When there are fewer Russians in Crimea, Putin's grip on the peninsula weakens. Ukraine is capitalizing on this fact by turning Crimea into a gray zone within the Ukraine war. What was supposed to be a source of strength for Russia has instead turned into one of Putin's greatest weaknesses, strategic liability that is well within range of Ukraine's new generation of drones and missiles, and is simply going to be struck again and again. The Kerch Bridge connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland has been proven vulnerable by repeated Ukrainian strikes. The Black Sea Fleet is almost a non-factor in the Black Sea. Russian air defense systems, oil and military installations are being destroyed in Crimea every week. What was once a base for all of Russia's southern operations has become a drain on Putin's resources. New Eastern Europe says that Russia still has around 150,000 soldiers stationed in Crimea. They're waiting for a ground attack that isn't going to come from Ukraine, and they can't head to the mainland because Ukraine is wrecking their ships. They're functionally useless. A defensive ground force stacked up against drones and missiles that they can't stop. Now Russia is dealing with a catch-22 in Crimea. It has too much on the peninsula to defend, and not enough of the types of resources it needs to protect the region's most valuable targets. Ukraine has been whittling away at air defenses, which has created the safe aerial corridors needed for the types of attacks we saw on April 19th. If Russia sends more defenses to Crimea, it weakens its forces on the mainland. If it keeps those defenses inside Ukraine, Crimea becomes more vulnerable with each drone strike. This is the genius of Ukraine's strategy in the Black Sea. Without sending soldiers, it has weakened Putin's hold on Crimea and the Black Sea. Liberation doesn't always have to involve troops overrunning defenses. It can come as a result of a consistent campaign that drives out the very people who occupied the territory in the first place. Ukraine's long-range strikes have already driven the bulk of the Black Sea fleet out of the stretch of water that gives the fleet its name. In Crimea, each attack against ports and military facilities, along with the oil fires that are visible from mainland Russia, sends a message. Get out while you can. Ukraine isn't going to stop. With mobilization looming, Putin may soon find the more Russians start heeding that message than he would have ever expected. Ukraine's campaign of deoccupation doesn't end with Crimea. On the mainland, and particularly in the south, Ukraine is going about liberating its territory more traditionally. Massive territorial gains are being made as Ukraine's active defense strategy starts to pay dividends. Drones are liberating Crimea, but on the ground in mainland Ukraine, it's soldiers, drones, and much more that are taking territory, as you'll discover if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you subscribe to the Military Show so you don't miss any of our analysis of Ukraine's latest victories against Russia. And thank you as always for watching.